welcome to Rough Cut Film Review. It's The Raid 2. I understand an American remake is on the way, or maybe it's here, but then there was an American version of Old Boy, and I will be long dead before I see that. So I went to see the original Raid, the Indonesian film, probably 5 times in the cinema. I absolutely loved it. I kept dragging people in to go and see it. Some of them didn't like it, actually. I was quite surprised, but basically it's an action film. If you like Die Hard, then you'll really do go and seek out this film. It's actually on Netflix at the moment, so there's really no excuse not to see it. Basically, in real life now, a Welshman and a handful of incredibly talented Indonesian martial artists, and I've forgotten the name for it now, but it's their local indigenous martial art, made one of my favourite action films of all time, absolutely all time. So The Raid, the first one, a team of elite cops head into a huge block of flats that's ruled over by a drug kingpin. As you can imagine, it all goes badly wrong pretty quickly, and they have to try and make it out with their lives. The clarity of the execution, the purity of what is a just really simple roller coaster of a film. It's a real adrenaline rush of absolutely brutal excitement. It all seems really fresh and new, even though it's a really basic premise. I absolutely loved it. Everything from the direction, the score, the grimy, sweaty style is absolutely perfect. And for me, the simple little western or samurai story of heroes and villains is all wrapped up perfectly. There are loose ends at the end, spoiler alert, but sometimes loose ends are good. In this case, it just gives you the impression that life goes on after this siege. Things are going to keep happening. The world keeps turning. We know so little about the personalities of the character, so be it the hero or Mad Dog, when they're really sinister baddie. But in a way, in the way that they fight, we know everything we need to know, and I really respect that. I love the brutal and incredible rhythm of the fight sequences. The claustrophobia was really fantastic. I loved the first film. It was made by someone who loves the same action films that I do, grew up watching the same action films, but someone who's really smart, making not simply a homage to those classic films like Die Hard, but arguably actually improving on the formula. It just seems so fresh. So skip forward to The Raid 2. So there's my review of The Raid, probably. So Raid 2, well, from the off, one of the main loose ends from the end of the first one is instantly closed off. And while I absolutely can't think of an interesting way to come up with a sequel to The Raid, that probably tells you absolutely everything you need to know about whether they should have tried to make a sequel or not. If the first film is singularly an action film with hints of horror possibly, think Assault on Precinct 13, the original, but even more brutal. And let's not forget, I loved the focus of the first film. The sequel is more of a crime drama. Think of a low-rent Infernal Affairs, if you know your Hong Kong cinema. If you don't, sort of The Departed. And for me, it just doesn't work. What our cast are really, really, really good at, some of the best you'll ever see is martial arts and fighting, and the camera work along with that is second to none. Absolutely superb. Bone-crunching violence. The sound of the fights is, the whole thing of its own is absolutely incredible. What the people here are not best at is acting, and unfortunately they have to do a lot of acting here. So Raza, our hero from the first one, I think his name is Raza, he infiltrates a crime syndicate on behest of some shadowy police figures. So he's going after the bad guys. In the first film, we'd seen literally seconds of his life before he goes on the raid. He prays, he works out, he loves his wife. I think either they've got a kid or she's pregnant, I forget which. But basically, he's a really good guy and he's a real badass. That's all we really need to know. And we're rooting for him. He's the good guy. Let's keep things nice and simple. Tragically, the sequel here tries to expand on that, and we lose that remarkable clarity or purity of the first film. Indeed, not just with the good guys. Mad Dog, spoiler alert, makes a miraculous appearance. Somehow he survived the events of the first film, and they introduce his estranged wife. And in the first film, he's incredibly sinister. He's actually a pretty small little guy. And then you see what he can do, and blimey, he can do some damage, and he's incredibly scary. And I think actually he's the fight choreographer, Yayan or something like this. But anyway, he's absolutely incredible and a really, really good baddie. It reminds me a little bit of, with the peripheral characters in The Simpsons, they try and develop them a bit more. When they ran out of ideas, they got the comic book guy and the sea captain, and they went, all right, well, we'll have an episode focusing on that. Suddenly, when you try and flesh out these cardboard characters, they become a lot less interesting. So there's a really dull scene here. The Mad Dog meeting his ex-wife, or his estranged wife, to give her some money, and he sort of says, oh, everything I've done for you. And she says, no, you didn't. Oh, you're a baddie. And he sort of, oh, I suppose I am a baddie. And it just doesn't work. I'm just not interested in that. He was much better, and I'm going to pretend the sequel didn't happen, actually, because even much better as just the sinister baddie. He's a really sadistic guy. You can see it in the way he fights, you can see it in the way he acts. He doesn't need to be doing it for his baby, alright? We just don't need to see that. So we end up with a dull plot regarding political intrigue that's not very intriguing, of some criminal families. There's some Japanese gangsters in there as well. Our hero's caught up, doing his thing, so the film obviously sets up his little action scenes. So this time round, the first one was a roller coaster ride. This one, we have to wait for some very average plot and exposition and acting. We have to wait and wait and wait, and then there's an incredible action scene which is really amazing, and then we have to wait and wait and wait, and then there's an incredible action scene, and that's how the game is played. And unfortunately here the sense of wonder of the first one is somewhat dulled. Superb fight scenes are still there, but without the focus of the first film, it's just not in the same league. However, and I will emphasise this, the fight scenes here are absolutely superb still. They're just shoehorned into a dull thriller. All the things that you'd expect to happen to our hero happen to him. We go through the checklist. He's got to go undercover, he's got to go into prison, dull, and then there's actually a really remarkable prison yard battle in the mud that's just amazing, and then dull, and then we get another awesome fight scene that's really, really cool, and then he sort of gets betrayed by his police handlers who are a bit shady anyway, and then dull, and then he gets drawn into the intrigue of it, and the lines between good and bad become blurry and dull, and he speaks to his wife and it takes longer than he thinks it's going to be, and it's like a Pixies song, except I love the Pixies all the way through. Quiet verse, loud chorus. That's just the way the game is played. But here the verses are dull, but the choruses are really quite awesome. So, you just have that trade-off, and it is quite a long film, over 2 hours. So to sum up, I am disappointed, but in fairness, I was expecting to be disappointed, because after the raid, where do you go with that? Where do you try and take those characters? There's nowhere to go. So we end up with something of a compromise that no one really wanted. I can't imagine anyone wanted this film to be made. Having said that, fight scenes are still really, really good, and there's bags of talent here, both in front of and behind the camera. It's just they're not entirely playing to their strengths, as they did in the first film. Kind regards, Christopher Thomas.